Did you know that the 2017 Greenland tsunami was triggered by a massive glacier collapse, sending waves over 90 feet high crashing into the coastline? This massive event, which happened on June 17, 2017, is one of the rare occasions where such a destructive natural disaster was caught on camera. The footage is breathtaking and shows the immense power of nature, reminding us just how fragile our planet can be. The incident took place in the Karat Fjord, a remote part of western Greenland. Greenland is home to the world's second largest ice sheet, which is over 3 kilometers thick in some places. This massive ice sheet has been shrinking rapidly over the past century, mainly due to rising temperatures. The ice loss is accelerating, and the result is something we're only starting to understand. The loss of ice leads to the collapse of glaciers, creating a dangerous ripple effect that can cause catastrophic events. In the case of this tsunami, the glacier that collapsed had been rapidly melting and breaking off into the fjord, adding pressure to the ice and ultimately causing the dramatic collapse. The tsunami itself was not caused by an earthquake, as most tsunamis are. Instead, it was triggered by the sudden and violent collapse of a section of the glacier into the fjord. When a large section of ice breaks off from the glacier, it can displace a significant amount of water. This displacement generates a huge wave, which in this case surged over 90 feet high. The enormous wave quickly moved toward the shore, sending water crashing into the surrounding coastline. Although the event occurred in a relatively remote area, the power of the tsunami was still strong enough to be recorded and studied by researchers who happened to be in the area at the time. This moment, captured on film, serves as a reminder of the terrifying power that nature can unleash. It also highlights just how vulnerable areas like Greenland are to the effects of climate change. Rising temperatures are melting the glaciers at an alarming rate, and these massive ice sheets are contributing to the rising sea levels we've been hearing about for years. When ice sheets melt and glaciers collapse, they don't just contribute to sea level rise, they can trigger other catastrophic events, like this one. The 2017 Greenland tsunami is just one example of how our changing climate is leading to increasingly extreme and dangerous natural disasters. The wave itself was incredibly dramatic. The scientists who filmed it were able to capture not just the size of the wave, but also the sense of how quickly it came crashing down. The image of that giant wall of water moving toward the shore, with plumes of water rising into the air, is unforgettable. It's a terrifying reminder that no matter how much we may think we control our environment, nature is still in charge, and sometimes it has the power to reshape everything in an instant. So, what exactly happened in Greenland that day, and what caused the glacier to collapse? The ice sheets in Greenland have been under stress for a long time. As the temperatures rise, the ice sheet begins to melt, weakening its structure. In the case of the Karat Fjord, a piece of the glacier became unstable, and it eventually cracked and fell into the fjord. This sudden release of ice caused the displacement of water, which created a wave so large that it crashed into the shoreline with unimaginable force. Though this was a relatively isolated area, the scale of the event makes it a warning sign of how climate change could affect coastal communities in the future. The fact that this event was caught on camera is one of the rare opportunities we have to witness nature's power in such a dramatic way. While this tsunami did not cause significant loss of life, it serves as a stark reminder of the dangers that climate change and glacial activity can bring. In the coming parts, we'll explore how the tsunami impacted the region, the aftermath, and the lasting effects of this event on our understanding of climate change's potential to create such sudden and severe natural disasters. The Karat Fjord tsunami on June 17, 2017 was a stark demonstration of the overwhelming force nature can unleash. What made this event even more remarkable was the rarity of such occurrences. While tsunamis are often associated with earthquakes, this one was triggered by the collapse of a massive glacier, which is an event that doesn't happen every day. The glacier's collapse created an enormous wave, sending it barreling toward the coast at a speed and size that was beyond comprehension. Scientists, researchers, and residents in the area witnessed something that few people ever experience firsthand: a natural disaster of this scale and power. The real story here isn't just the tsunami itself, but the warning signs that preceded it. For years before the collapse, the ice sheet in Greenland had been melting at an accelerated rate. This rapid melting isn't just a phenomenon we're seeing in Greenland, it's part of a much larger pattern of global warming and climate change. As the temperatures rise, glaciers, which were once stable, begin to break apart and release huge chunks of ice into the surrounding waters. This process, known as calving, is not unusual, but the scale at which it occurred in this instance was beyond what most experts anticipated. What set the 2017 Greenland tsunami apart from others was the sheer size of the glacier collapse. The Karet Fjord, where the glacier had been slowly eroding, became the site of one of the most dramatic natural events in recent history. The collapse of the glacier was so sudden and violent that it displaced a huge volume of water, which led to the creation of a giant wave. This tsunami was so powerful that it reached up to 90 feet in height. The size and speed at which it traveled is a reminder of just how quickly natural disasters can strike, especially when driven by larger environmental factors like the melting ice sheets. While the tsunami did not cause fatalities, it was a wake-up call. It's one thing to hear about the melting of the Greenland ice sheet or the rising sea levels, but it's another thing entirely to see the immediate effects of those changes in real time. This wasn't a slow-moving crisis. This was something sudden and uncontrollable. The collapse of the glacier, followed by the formation of a massive tsunami, showed just how fragile our coastlines are. The event underscored the dangers coastal communities face due to the effects of climate change and how rapidly things can go from a minor event to something devastating. Scientists who were working in the area that day were fortunate to capture this extraordinary moment on film. The footage not only allowed us to witness the power of the wave, but also gave us a glimpse into the forces of nature that we often overlook. Seeing a glacier collapse in real time, followed by a tsunami crashing against the shore, provided an unparalleled perspective on the vulnerability of areas like Greenland to the changes caused by global warming. It's these types of events that serve as a visual reminder of the broader environmental challenges we face as a planet. Greenland's ice sheet has been shrinking for decades, but the events of June 17, 2017 made it painfully clear just how severe the consequences of this shrinking are. The aftermath of this tsunami was immediate and violent, but its long-term effects may be even more profound. As more glaciers continue to collapse and ice sheets melt, the world will be faced with a rising number of unpredictable and catastrophic events, from larger waves and stronger storms to increasingly devastating natural disasters that affect not just remote regions but coastal cities around the world. The Greenland tsunami stands as a symbol of the kind of dangers we will increasingly face in the years to come if we don't take action. But what can be done to stop the process? Scientists and experts are continually studying these changes, seeking ways to predict such events and protect vulnerable communities. The solutions aren't easy, and they require global cooperation. But understanding the causes, the impacts, and the magnitude of such events is the first step toward addressing the wider climate crisis, and ensuring that future generations don't have to live through the devastating consequences of a rapidly changing world. The immediate aftermath of the June 17, 2017 tsunami in Greenland was both breathtaking and terrifying. The wave, with its massive force, reshaped the landscape of the Karet Fjord in ways that were hard to comprehend. While the event itself was over in a matter of minutes, the damage it caused would last for much longer. It wasn't just the destruction of the glacier itself. The real devastation came from the massive wave it created. As it crashed into the coastline, it left behind a scene of complete destruction. In the hours after the tsunami, the coastline was left in a state of disarray. Huge chunks of ice that had broken off from the glacier were scattered all along the shore. Rocks, trees, and debris were tossed around, some carried far from their original locations. The violent force of the wave had reshaped the coastline, washing away anything in its path. It wasn't just the physical destruction that was concerning. The event also revealed the delicate balance of the area's ecosystem. The fjord, which was home to a variety of wildlife, had been disturbed. The turbulent waters displaced marine life and caused irreversible damage to the natural environment. As the waves receded, it became clear that this was a dramatic reminder of how quickly nature can change, how fragile our ecosystems are, and how easily they can be disrupted by even a single catastrophic event. Though the immediate impact was catastrophic, the tsunami also served as an environmental warning. The glacier that collapsed, sending the huge wave crashing toward the shore, had been melting at an accelerating rate. This wasn't just an isolated incident, it was a small glimpse into the future of what could happen if global warming continues to progress at its current pace. If these glacial collapses become more common, the number of such tsunamis may rise, leading to even greater destruction in coastal areas. The loss of ice from the Greenland ice sheet has already contributed to rising sea levels, which in turn has made coastal communities more vulnerable to storms and flooding. This particular event was like a microcosm of the much larger challenges that lie ahead if nothing is done to slow the effects of climate change. The fact that the tsunami in Greenland occurred in a remote area where human life was not lost was in many ways a small blessing. However, the power of this natural disaster made it clear that it could happen anywhere. Coastal communities around the world, particularly those in low-lying areas, are at risk of similar events if the glaciers continue to melt at this alarming rate. It's a reminder that, although these events are still rare, their potential to cause widespread damage is significant. As we learn from these events, it's essential that we invest in understanding the science behind glacial activity and tsunamis and how we can better predict and prepare for such disasters in the future. In the days and weeks following the tsunami, researchers from around the world flocked to the area to study the impact of the wave and the glacier collapse. The footage captured by scientists working in the region became a valuable resource, providing insights into the power of these kinds of natural events. But the true impact of the tsunami on Greenland's environment and the larger issue of climate change became a central focus for many experts. This one event acted as a stark reminder that the problems caused by global warming are not just about rising temperatures, they are about the complete disruption of ecosystems, the destruction of landscapes, and the unpredictable chain reactions that can follow. As experts began to analyze the data and the footage of the event, one thing became clear: we are entering a new era of climate risk. Events like the Greenland tsunami are not isolated occurrences, but part of a larger pattern of increasingly extreme weather events and natural disasters. The changing climate is already reshaping the world around us, and as we continue to see more and more of these kinds of events, the importance of taking action to address climate change becomes even more urgent. The impact of the Greenland tsunami serves as a cautionary tale, one that reminds us of the pressing need to tackle the environmental crisis before it's too late. The June 17, 2017, Greenland tsunami was a wake-up call, a stark reminder of the growing dangers of climate change and the powerful forces of nature that we are only beginning to understand. While the destruction caused by the massive wave was extraordinary, the most alarming aspect of the event was the role that the melting glaciers and rising temperatures played in its creation. Greenland, with its vast ice sheet that has been slowly but surely shrinking over the past century, is at the forefront of this global crisis. The event wasn't just an isolated disaster, it was a clear sign of the devastating consequences of climate change. The Greenland tsunami serves as a powerful symbol of what can happen when nature's delicate balance is upset by human activity, particularly the burning of fossil fuels and the unchecked emission of greenhouse gases. Looking forward, it is clear that we need to pay more attention to the effects of glacial collapse and the associated risk of tsunami waves. Although the June 2017 disaster did not result in significant loss of life, the next event could easily take place in a more populated region with far-reaching consequences. The rapid rate at which Greenland's glaciers are melting suggests that tsunamis like the one we witnessed may become more frequent. As the glaciers continue to shed enormous amounts of ice into the sea, the risks of larger, more destructive tsunamis become more apparent. This is especially concerning for low-lying coastal areas around the world, where people are already facing the threat of rising sea levels and storm surges. Communities that live in these vulnerable regions must prepare for the worst and take measures to protect themselves. In addition to preparing for the immediate effects of such events, it is essential that we focus on long-term solutions to mitigate the causes of climate change. Reducing carbon emissions, transitioning to renewable energy sources, and implementing stronger environmental protection policies are all key steps that can help slow the melting of glaciers and the rise in sea levels. By addressing these root causes, we can not only reduce the risks of tsunamis, but also help stabilize the global climate for future generations. The event in Greenland should be seen not just as an isolated disaster, but as part of a larger trend of increasingly extreme weather events, driven by climate change. As we move forward, it's important to remember that the 2017 Greenland tsunami is not just a story of destruction, but also one of resilience and hope. The scientific community has responded to this event with a renewed commitment to studying and understanding the effects of climate change. Researchers are now more focused than ever on developing better tools and technologies to predict glacial calving, monitor sea levels, and warn communities about the potential for future tsunamis. The lessons learned from this event are helping us prepare for similar disasters in the future, but much more needs to be done. Increased funding for climate science, stronger international cooperation, and better disaster preparedness are crucial if we hope to protect vulnerable communities from the full impact of climate change. In conclusion, the 2017 Greenland tsunami is a powerful reminder that we cannot afford to ignore the impacts of climate change any longer. It is a call to action for all of us to do our part in slowing the destruction of our planet and protecting future generations from the devastating consequences of extreme weather events. While the wave that crashed into the Greenland coastline was a breathtaking display of nature's power, it also serves as a sobering warning of what lies ahead if we do not act swiftly and decisively. Let the tsunami be a symbol of change, a symbol that urges us to take responsibility for our environment before it's too late. The question is, will we heed the call? Between 2019 and 2020, Australia faced one of its most devastating natural disasters in recent history, the Black Summer Wildfires. This catastrophic series of fires began in September 2019 and continued until March 2020, burning through vast areas across the southeastern parts of the country. The wildfires affected New South Wales, Victoria, and South Australia, with some of the most intense fires occurring from December 2019 to January 2020. Australia is no stranger to bushfires, but the scale and intensity of these fires were unprecedented. The fires scorched approximately 24.3 million hectares, 60 million acres of land, an area larger than many countries. The blazes resulted in the destruction of thousands of homes and buildings, causing significant loss of life and property. By the end of the fire season, the official death toll included 33 people directly from the fires, with additional deaths attributed to smoke inhalation and related health issues. The Black Summer wildfires were driven by a combination of extreme weather conditions, including record-breaking temperatures and severe drought. These factors created the perfect environment for fires to ignite and spread rapidly, leading to the unprecedented scale of destruction witnessed. The fires not only devastated communities, but also had a profound impact on the environment and wildlife, with millions of animals perishing and vast areas of natural habitat destroyed. This period marked a significant chapter in Australia's history, highlighting the severe impacts of climate change and the urgent need for improved fire management and environmental protection strategies. The formation of the Black Summer wildfires was driven by a combination of natural and human-induced factors. Australia experienced a particularly harsh drought, starting in late 2018, which continued into 2019. This drought, one of the most severe on record, drastically reduced soil moisture levels and left vegetation extremely dry. The dry conditions created a tinderbox effect, where even a small spark could trigger a massive blaze, and in the months leading up to the fires, Australia saw record-breaking temperatures. In December 2019, the average maximum temperature across the continent reached 40.9 Celsius, with the record being broken the next day at 40.9 Celsius. These extreme temperatures were accompanied by high winds, which further fueled the spread of the fires. The first fires were reported in early September 2019, primarily in the northern parts of New South Wales. The initial fires, such as the Long Gully Road fire near Drake, started as small outbreaks but quickly escalated due to the extreme heat and dry conditions. By October, these fires had already caused significant damage, destroying homes and threatening communities. As the fire season progressed, the situation worsened. By November 2019, fires had intensified across multiple states, including New South Wales, Victoria, and South Australia. The Australian government and local fire services began preparations for a prolonged and challenging fire season. Resources were mobilized, and firefighters from across Australia, as well as international teams from countries like Canada and New Zealand, were deployed to combat the blazes. The fires quickly became a major crisis. With dry conditions persisting and temperatures soaring, the fires spread rapidly, impacting larger areas and causing unprecedented damage. The early days of the fires set the stage for what would become one of the most devastating wildfire seasons in Australian history, with fires burning uncontrollably and wreaking havoc across the southeast of the country. As the Black Summer wildfires raged on, the scale of their destruction became increasingly apparent. The fires, fueled by the relentless heat and dry conditions, began to consume vast expanses of land. By late December 2019, the fires had reached their peak, causing widespread devastation across southeastern Australia. In New South Wales, hundreds of fires burned simultaneously, impacting communities across the state. The fires spread from the north coast, the Blue Mountains, and the south coast. Towns such as Cobargo and Malakuta were severely affected, with flames threatening homes and forcing evacuations. The sheer intensity of the fires led to some areas being cut off, leaving residents stranded and in dire need of assistance. Victoria also faced its share of the crisis. Large fires in eastern and northeastern Victoria created a formidable challenge for firefighters. Areas such as East Gippsland saw fires that burned uncontrollably for weeks, destroying homes and infrastructure. The fire's impact was so severe that some towns, including Corryong and Malakuta, were isolated for extended periods. South Australia and the Australian Capital Territory were not spared either. The Adelaide Hills and Kangaroo Island experienced significant fires, while the Acre saw fires encroach on the outskirts of Canberra. The relentless fires led to the destruction of more than 3,000 buildings, including nearly 2,800 homes. The scale of the destruction extended beyond just buildings. The fires caused extensive damage to the environment, burning through an estimated 24.3 million hectares of land. This massive loss of land affected various ecosystems, decimating habitats, and leading to the deaths of millions of animals. The fire's smoke created hazardous air quality across the country, impacting millions of people and contributing to an increase in respiratory issues. The fire's intensity and duration led to a crisis of monumental proportions. As firefighting efforts struggled to keep pace with the rapidly spreading blazes, the impact on communities, wildlife, and the environment became evident. The Black Summer wildfires left a trail of destruction that would take years to recover from, marking one of the darkest periods in Australia's recent history. The aftermath of the Black Summer wildfires left a landscape marked by both visible and hidden scars. The fires had burned through an enormous area, leaving vast expanses of land charred and barren. The environmental impact was profound and far-reaching. In the wake of the fires, the destruction of habitats was widespread. Forests that once thrived with diverse wildlife were left in ruins. The loss of vegetation meant that many animals, already struggling with the effects of climate change and habitat loss, faced even more severe challenges. Among the hardest hit were species already on the brink of extinction. The koala population, for instance, was dramatically affected. With their habitats severely impacted, conservationists feared that the fires might have pushed this iconic species closer to extinction. Estimates suggested that the koala population in New South Wales, Queensland, and the Australian Capital Territory had been reduced by more than half since the year 2000. The impact on other wildlife was equally severe. It was estimated that nearly 3 billion terrestrial vertebrates, mostly reptiles, were affected by the fires. Some endangered species were believed to have been driven to extinction. The fires also led to significant losses among plant species, with some areas potentially losing entire plant communities. The fires also had significant effects on the soil and water systems. The intense heat and burning of vegetation led to soil erosion, reducing the land's ability to support future plant growth. Water sources, including rivers and streams, were contaminated with ash and debris, affecting aquatic life and complicating water management in affected regions. The smoke from the fires had a severe impact on air quality across Australia. At the peak of the fires, air quality dropped to hazardous levels in many areas, leading to respiratory problems for millions of people. The smoke also traveled long distances, impacting air quality in other countries and contributing to global environmental concerns. The economic costs of the fires were staggering. The fires resulted in billions of dollars in property damage and economic losses. Tourism revenue fell significantly, and the cost of firefighting and recovery efforts soared. The Australian government, along with international aid and donations, worked to address the immediate needs of affected communities and support recovery efforts. The fires highlighted the urgent need for improved environmental protection and disaster preparedness. The Australian government's Environmental Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act, designed to protect threatened species and their habitats, was found to be insufficient in preventing such widespread destruction. This led to calls for a review and strengthening of environmental laws to better safeguard Australia's unique wildlife and ecosystems. Overall, the Black Summer wildfires left a lasting impact on Australia's environment and its people. The recovery process would be long and challenging, requiring concerted efforts to restore damaged ecosystems, support affected communities, and address the broader issues of climate change and environmental conservation. The Black Summer wildfires were a devastating chapter in Australia's history, leaving a significant mark on both the environment and the people. As the fires were finally brought under control, the country faced the enormous task of recovery. The immediate aftermath saw efforts directed towards rebuilding communities and restoring infrastructure. Homes were reconstructed and damaged areas were repaired. With the help of both local and international aid, one of the major focuses was the restoration of the affected ecosystems. Conservationists worked tirelessly to replant trees, rehabilitate wildlife, and monitor the recovery of damaged habitats. Projects aimed at rebuilding wildlife corridors and restoring soil health were essential in helping the environment bounce back. However, experts acknowledge that the complete recovery of Australia's unique landscapes and wildlife would take many years. The Black Summer fires highlighted crucial lessons about disaster preparedness and climate resilience. The intensity and scale of the fires pointed to the need for improved fire management practices and better strategies for dealing with extreme weather events. Controlled burns, enhanced land management, and increased investment in firefighting resources became key areas of focus. Furthermore, the fires emphasized the urgent need to address climate change. Rising global temperatures and shifting climate patterns contributed to the severity of the fires, underlining the importance of comprehensive climate action to mitigate future risks. As Australia continues to rebuild, there is a renewed emphasis on creating a more resilient and sustainable future. The experience has driven a national and global dialogue on environmental protection and climate action. Although the path to recovery is long and challenging, the resilience of the affected communities and the commitment to tackling climate change offer hope for a more secure and sustainable future. In August of 2017, Hurricane Harvey made history as one of the most devastating storms to ever hit the United States. With its catastrophic rainfall and widespread flooding, it left a lasting impact on Texas and Louisiana, claiming lives, displacing thousands, and causing billions in damage. In this video, we'll take a closer look at how Hurricane Harvey formed, its destruction, and the lasting lessons learned from the storm. Join us as we explore the powerful forces behind this natural disaster and its aftermath. Hurricane Harvey started its journey as a tropical wave on August 12, 2017. This wave emerged from the coast of Africa, moving across the Atlantic Ocean towards the Caribbean. Over the next few days, the system began to show signs of development. By August 17th, the tropical wave had strengthened enough to become a tropical depression, with winds reaching 45 miles per hour. As Harvey made its way into the Caribbean, it briefly weakened due to unfavorable wind conditions. By August 19th, it had degenerated into a tropical wave again. However, it wasn't the end for Harvey. By August 23rd, the system was back on track, with a fresh surface low forming in the Bay of Campeche off the coast of Mexico. This marked the beginning of the storm's rapid intensification. By August 24th, Harvey had regained its strength, transforming into a tropical storm with winds exceeding 60 miles per hour. It quickly gained momentum as it moved towards the Gulf Coast of the United States. The storm continued to intensify as it approached the Texas coastline. By August 25th, Harvey strengthened into a Category 4 hurricane, packing winds of over 130 miles per hour. Harvey's journey from a small tropical wave to a powerful hurricane was a reminder of how unpredictable nature can be. What started as a modest system over the Atlantic Ocean quickly transformed into one of the most devastating storms in U.S. history. At this point, the storm was about to make landfall and change the lives of millions of people. The devastation that followed would be a result of the immense rainfall and flooding that would accompany Harvey's landfall in Texas. On August 25, 2017, Hurricane Harvey made its first landfall near Rockport, Texas, as a powerful Category 4 hurricane. With sustained winds reaching 135 miles per hour, Harvey's winds caused widespread damage to buildings, infrastructure, and trees along the coastline. The storm surge was particularly destructive, flooding coastal areas and leaving many residents trapped. In addition to the surge, the rain that Harvey brought with it began to fall in staggering amounts, setting the stage for the catastrophic flooding that would soon follow. After making landfall, Harvey didn't waste any time moving inland. It began to slow down, almost stalling over eastern Texas. This slow movement allowed Harvey to unload record-breaking rainfall. In some places, the rain began to accumulate rapidly, with more than 40 inches of rain falling in just a few days. As the storm lingered over Texas, areas such as Nederland received a jaw-dropping 60 inches of rain, making it the wettest tropical cyclone in U.S. history at that time. The heavy rainfall caused rivers and bayous to overflow, leading to widespread flooding in greater Houston and surrounding areas. The floodwaters quickly turned streets into rivers, submerging homes, businesses, and entire neighborhoods. The rising waters trapped thousands of people in their homes, forcing many to seek refuge on rooftops or in attics. Emergency rescue operations quickly began, with local authorities, the National Guard, and volunteers working tirelessly to save lives and evacuate those in danger. In total, more than 30,000 people were displaced, and over 17,000 rescues were made across Texas. Harvey's impact wasn't limited to Texas alone. Louisiana also felt the storm's wrath, but the most severe damage was centered in Texas. The storm continued to release heavy rain even as it moved northeastward, leaving behind a trail of destruction that would take months, if not years, to recover from. At this point, it was clear that Hurricane Harvey was going to be one of the most devastating storms to hit the United States in recent memory. As Hurricane Harvey continued to dump rain over Texas, the scale of the devastation became clearer. By August 29, 2017, parts of the state had been submerged under several feet of water. Roads, highways, and bridges were impassable, and many areas were left without power for extended periods. The massive flooding overwhelmed the region's infrastructure, leaving residents stranded and without basic services. Hospitals and emergency services were stretched to their limits as they worked around the clock to care for the injured and evacuate those in need. In the aftermath, communities faced severe challenges. The flooding not only caused widespread property damage, but also impacted essential services like water supply, electricity, and healthcare. In Houston, the fourth largest city in the United States, floodwaters inundated thousands of homes. Entire neighborhoods were left uninhabitable, and more than 400,000 people had to seek shelter, many in temporary shelters set up by the Red Cross and other relief organizations. Despite the overwhelming devastation, Texans showed incredible resilience. Local residents, firefighters, police officers, and volunteers from around the country came together to assist in rescue efforts. The U.S. military and the National Guard deployed personnel to help with search and rescue operations, and the Federal Emergency Management Agency, or FEMA, quickly provided support in the form of food, water, and emergency supplies. The sight of people using boats, canoes, and even airboats to rescue stranded families became a symbol of hope and community solidarity during this dark time. The response was swift, but the recovery process was far from quick. Over 300,000 homes were affected, and many sustained severe damage. More than 1,000 homes were destroyed, and thousands more had major structural damage. Houston alone saw around 32,000 homes damaged, with significant destruction in low-lying areas. The sheer magnitude of the disaster meant that recovery efforts would take years, and many people were forced to rebuild their lives from scratch. The emotional and psychological toll was also significant. For many, the loss of homes, personal belongings, and even loved ones was devastating. The storm claimed the lives of more than 100 people in total, with the majority of those deaths occurring in Texas. In addition to the direct effects of the storm, many people experienced long-term challenges such as displacement, financial hardships, and the trauma of losing everything they had. Despite the overwhelming challenges, the disaster also led to widespread support. Communities and individuals came together, providing donations, volunteering, and offering assistance in any way they could. The generosity and unity that emerged during this difficult time highlighted the strength of the human spirit in the face of tragedy. While the recovery would take years, the response to Hurricane Harvey demonstrated the power of community and resilience in times of crisis. In the wake of Hurricane Harvey, it became clear that the disaster's effects would extend far beyond the immediate recovery efforts. The storm highlighted several key issues related to infrastructure, flood management, and the need for better preparedness in future natural disasters. One of the most significant lessons learned from Harvey was the vulnerability of certain areas, especially in relation to flooding. Houston, which sits on flat land and has a sprawling urban development, found its drainage systems overwhelmed by the unprecedented rainfall. The storm's catastrophic flooding demonstrated that existing flood control measures were inadequate to handle such an extreme event. Many experts called for major changes in how cities like Houston manage stormwater, emphasizing the need for improved infrastructure to better protect communities from future flooding. As a result, local officials began working on the long-term strategies to bolster the city's flood defenses, including expanding reservoirs, upgrading stormwater drainage systems, and focusing on urban planning that accounts for more resilient water management. However, these changes would require significant time, resources, and coordination between local, state, and federal agencies. Another critical lesson was the importance of emergency preparedness and the need for a faster, more efficient response in future disasters. While the response to Harvey was swift, it became evident that certain areas were caught off guard by the storm's intensity and duration. Many people were forced to evacuate without adequate warning, and emergency services were initially overwhelmed by the scale of the disaster. As a result, authorities began re-evaluating emergency evacuation plans, communication systems, and coordination with neighboring regions to ensure that future evacuations and relief efforts could be carried out more effectively. In addition to the physical damage, the economic impact of Hurricane Harvey was staggering. The storm caused an estimated $125 billion in damages, making it the second costliest natural disaster in U.S. history at the time. Thousands of businesses were forced to close, and the oil and gas industry in Texas was significantly disrupted. The loss of income, combined with the cost of rebuilding, created significant financial challenges for both individuals and communities. Despite these setbacks, many businesses began to recover in the months that followed, and the local economy slowly rebounded. The storm also led to an increase in conversations about the need for stronger building codes, especially in areas prone to flooding. The mental and emotional impact of the storm lingered for many survivors. Displacement, the loss of homes, and the overwhelming destruction took a toll on the mental health of thousands. However, the support systems and the strength of local communities helped many individuals cope with the trauma. Mental health services were made available to those affected, and the resilience shown by survivors and volunteers became a testament to the power of human spirit in the face of tragedy. As Texas and the Gulf Coast region continue to recover, Hurricane Harvey's impact serves as a reminder of the unpredictable power of nature and the importance of being prepared. The storm's aftermath has led to improvements in disaster response protocols and a greater focus on climate change and its potential to fuel more extreme weather events. While it remains one of the costliest and most devastating storms in history, the lessons learned from Hurricane Harvey have shaped future disaster response and recovery efforts, helping communities better prepare for the challenges that lie ahead. As the years pass, Texas and the affected regions will continue to rebuild, but the memories of Hurricane Harvey will remain. The storm not only changed the physical landscape, but also altered the way people think about climate change, infrastructure, and resilience in the face of natural disasters. The earthquake that struck Myanmar and Thailand on Friday, March 28, 2025, was one of the most devastating natural disasters in recent history. The powerful magnitude 7.7 quake shook the region, leaving behind widespread destruction, loss of life, and a humanitarian crisis that would take years to recover from. The epicenter of the quake was located near Mandalay, Myanmar's second largest city, a region already vulnerable due to its location along the Sagang Fault. This fault is a major tectonic boundary where the Indian and Eurasian plates grind against each other, making it one of the most seismically active areas in Southeast Asia. While scientists had long known that this area was at risk for a major earthquake, the sheer scale of the disaster was something that no one could have fully prepared for. As the ground began to shake around midday, panic spread across cities and towns. In Mandalay, centuries-old Buddhist monasteries crumbled, trapping monks and civilians beneath the rubble. A significant portion of the city was reduced to ruins, with an estimated 1/5 of buildings completely destroyed. In Myanmar, a town near the capital, Naypyidaw, dozens of buildings collapsed, including monasteries, where many lives were lost. The effects of the earthquake were not limited to Myanmar. In Thailand's capital, Bangkok, located over 600 miles from the epicenter. The tremors were powerful enough to send people running into the streets. A skyscraper under construction collapsed entirely, leading to multiple fatalities and trapping more than 100 people under debris. Hotels, office buildings, and homes shook violently, with some suffering structural damage that made them unsafe to enter. Beyond the visible destruction, the earthquake's impact on infrastructure was severe. Roads were torn apart by deep fissures, making it nearly impossible for emergency crews to reach affected areas quickly. Bridges collapsed, severing key transportation routes. In Naypyidaw, a 1,000-bed hospital suffered major structural damage, further complicating efforts to treat the wounded. The initial shock was followed by a powerful aftershock and several smaller ones, making rescue efforts even more dangerous. With communications down in many areas, the true extent of the damage was not immediately clear. Reports trickled in of entire villages suffering near total destruction, leaving thousands of people homeless overnight. In the hours following the earthquake, Myanmar's military leader, General Min Aung Hlaing, acknowledged the scale of the disaster, warning that the number of casualties would likely rise. He also made a rare appeal for international assistance, stating that any country willing to help was welcome to do so. Meanwhile, in the United States, President Donald Trump addressed the situation, confirming that his administration would provide aid to Myanmar. The U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID, mobilized disaster response teams, offering emergency supplies such as food and clean water. Other countries began to follow suit, but the ongoing conflict in Myanmar complicated relief efforts. The military junta had been struggling to maintain control amid a growing insurgency, and the political instability made it difficult for aid organizations to operate effectively. In the immediate aftermath, search and rescue operations became the top priority. Volunteers and emergency workers raced against time to pull survivors from the wreckage. However, the lack of heavy machinery made the process painfully slow. Many survivors were left trapped under debris, their voices calling out for help as rescuers worked with limited resources. As the first chaotic hours passed, it became clear that this was a disaster unlike any other in recent memory. The people of Myanmar and Thailand were facing not only the destruction of their homes and cities, but also a long and difficult road to recovery. In the coming days, the focus will shift to providing food, water, and medical care to the survivors. But even as relief efforts ramped up, the challenges ahead remained immense. This was only the beginning of the devastating aftermath of the earthquake. In the hours following the earthquake, the full scale of the disaster began to emerge. Emergency response teams in Myanmar and Thailand struggled to navigate the widespread destruction, with blocked roads, damaged bridges, and collapsed buildings, making it difficult to reach those in need. The rescue effort was further complicated by the sheer number of aftershocks, some strong enough to bring down already weakened structures. As the sun set on Friday, March 28, 2025, entire neighborhoods in Mandalay, Myanmar, and surrounding areas remained in ruins, with thousands of people left homeless and desperate for help. Survivors described scenes of chaos and devastation. Many who had fled their homes were now gathered in open spaces, afraid to return indoors. Makeshift camps began to form in parks and fields as people tried to find shelter. Hospitals in Mandalay and other affected cities were overwhelmed, struggling to care for the injured as medical supplies dwindled. In some areas, doctors and nurses were forced to treat patients outside, using whatever resources were available. The earthquake's impact on infrastructure was severe. Power outages left much of Mandalay in darkness, with only emergency generators providing limited electricity. Telecommunications were heavily disrupted, making it difficult for families to check on their loved ones. In Myanmar, where a significant number of buildings had collapsed, rescue workers faced a heartbreaking reality. Many trapped victims could still be heard beneath the rubble, but the lack of proper equipment slowed efforts to reach them. Volunteers and first responders used their bare hands and simple tools to dig through the debris, knowing that time was running out. In Thailand, the destruction was most severe in Bangkok, where the collapse of a high-rise building had already claimed multiple lives. Emergency crews worked tirelessly to search for survivors in the wreckage, while others assessed the damage to surrounding structures. Authorities urged residents to avoid unsafe buildings, fearing further collapses. Despite the destruction, Thailand's emergency response teams were better equipped than those in Myanmar, and international aid began arriving quickly to assist in the relief efforts. As rescue operations continued, the political situation in Myanmar made the crisis even more difficult to manage. The country had already been struggling with instability, and the military leadership faced criticism for its slow response. The junta-controlled state media reported that at least 144 people had been killed, with over 700 injured, though experts feared the true numbers were much higher. Humanitarian organizations struggled to gain access to affected regions, as restrictions on movement and ongoing conflict made relief efforts increasingly complex. Meanwhile, scientists and earthquake experts analyzed the event, confirming that it had occurred along the Sagaing Fault, one of the most active seismic zones in Southeast Asia. The powerful strike-slip movement of the fault had caused intense shaking over a wide area, with damage extending far beyond the immediate epicenter. Seismologists warned that strong aftershocks could continue for days or even weeks, posing further risks to already damaged buildings. The disaster was a stark reminder of the vulnerability of the region to major earthquakes. While Thailand had better infrastructure and emergency preparedness, Myanmar's aging buildings and lack of earthquake-resistant construction had contributed to the high number of casualties. Experts noted that many structures in Mandalay, including monasteries and historical sites, had not been built to withstand such a powerful tremor. As night fell on the first day after the earthquake, the focus remained on saving lives. Rescue workers continued digging through rubble, medical teams treated the injured with limited supplies, and survivors braced for another night of uncertainty. The true extent of the disaster was still unfolding, and the long road to recovery only just begun. As it's only the early hours of the second day since the disaster, the enormity of the crisis became even clearer. Entire neighborhoods throughout the surrounding areas, cities, and towns were reduced to rubble, and the death toll continued to rise as more bodies were pulled from the debris. Emergency workers, many of whom had gone without sleep, pushed forward with rescue efforts despite the overwhelming conditions. The sound of sirens and frantic calls for help filled the air as volunteers and medical teams raced to save lives. Survivors faced worsening conditions as they struggled to find food, clean water, and medical care. The lack of electricity meant that refrigeration was impossible, causing food supplies to spoil quickly. Many were left with only what they had managed to grab before fleeing their homes. Local markets had been destroyed and supply chains were disrupted, making it difficult to bring in fresh goods. Relief organizations tried to set up distribution points, but with damaged roads and limited access, aid was slow to reach those in need. Temporary shelters sprang up in open fields and makeshift camps, where thousands of displaced people gathered in search of safety. These overcrowded conditions raised concerns about sanitation and the potential spread of disease. Without proper facilities, clean water, or medical supplies, illnesses such as diarrhea and respiratory infections began to take hold. Doctors and volunteers worked tirelessly to provide basic care, but the situation was growing worse by the hour. In Bangkok, efforts continued to clear the wreckage of the collapsed high-rise building, where rescuers feared dozens were still trapped. Heavy machinery was brought in to assist, but unstable debris made the work dangerous. Families gathered nearby, anxiously awaiting news of their loved ones. Officials warned that aftershocks could cause further collapses, urging residents to remain cautious. The Thai government had mobilized emergency response teams and was working with international partners to provide aid to affected areas. And back in Myanmar, the situation remained dire. The country's political instability complicated relief efforts, with reports of delayed government response and restrictions on foreign aid. Some areas remained completely cut off, with residents forced to rely on community efforts for survival. In Mandalay, religious leaders and local volunteers took the lead in organizing relief efforts, setting up food kitchens and providing temporary shelter in monasteries. International aid organizations struggled to navigate the political barriers, but some managed to deliver much-needed supplies. The United Nations and various humanitarian groups sent shipments of medical supplies, tents, and clean water to the region. The United States Agency for International Development, despite earlier funding cuts, announced that it would be sending disaster response teams to assist. However, logistical challenges made distribution difficult, with damaged roads and collapsed bridges delaying shipments. Seismologists continued to analyze the earthquake, warning that aftershocks could persist for weeks. Many buildings still standing had suffered structural damage, making them unsafe for residents to return. Experts noted that the Sagaing Fault had experienced major quakes in the past, but this event was one of the most destructive in recent history. They stressed the need for improved building standards in the region to prevent future disasters from causing similar devastation. Meanwhile, stories of survival and heroism emerged. In one case, a man trapped beneath a collapsed apartment building in Myanmar was rescued after hours of being trapped. He had survived by drinking rainwater, despite that seeped through the wreckage and tapping on metal pipes to signal rescuers. In another, a group of monks helped evacuate dozens of people from a monastery, just minutes before it collapsed. These stories provided moments of hope amid the overwhelming tragedy. As night approached, thousands remained without shelter, and the need for aid grew even more urgent. The region faced a long and difficult recovery, with countless families left grieving and entire communities struggling to rebuild. The days ahead will bring new challenges, but for now, the focus remains on rescuing those still trapped and providing relief to the survivors who had lost everything. In the 9 hours since the powerful earthquake struck Myanmar and Thailand, the region has been thrown into chaos. Rescue operations are still in full force, with emergency teams working tirelessly to pull survivors from the rubble. As the hours pass, the urgency grows. Every minute counts in the search for those still trapped. The damage is extensive, with entire sections of cities reduced to ruins. Streets are filled with dust and debris, making it difficult for rescue vehicles to navigate through the wreckage. In Mandalay, where the destruction is among the worst, emergency workers are struggling to reach people buried beneath collapsed apartment buildings. The sound of heavy machinery fills the air as crews work to clear the debris, but for many, all they can do is wait. Survivors and volunteers have joined the rescue effort, using whatever tools they can find to dig through the wreckage. Some trapped individuals have managed to make contact with rescuers through phone calls or by shouting for help, but many remain silent, their fate unknown. Hospitals are overwhelmed, with doctors and nurses working beyond capacity to treat the injured. Many medical facilities sustained damage in the quake, forcing staff to set up makeshift treatment areas in parking lots and open spaces. Supplies are already running low, and with aftershocks continuing to shake the region, the fear of further collapses is keeping both patients and medical workers on edge. In some areas, the injured are being transported by motorcycles and bicycles due to roads being blocked by fallen buildings. In Bangkok, emergency crews continue to search through the ruins of the collapsed high-rise building. The structure, once a towering landmark under construction, is now a massive pile of twisted metal and broken concrete. Dozens of workers were inside when the quake hit, and authorities fear that many did not make it out in time. Relatives of those trapped are gathered nearby, waiting anxiously for any news. Officials have confirmed fatalities, but with so many still unaccounted for, the full toll remains uncertain. Across the region, thousands have been left homeless, forced to sleep in open spaces or makeshift shelters as they wait for assistance. Food and clean water are already becoming scarce, and the risk of disease is growing as sanitation systems have been severely damaged. Aid organizations and government agencies are scrambling to respond, but the scale of the disaster is making relief efforts difficult. Political tensions in Myanmar are adding another layer of complexity to the situation. The military junta has issued statements calling for international aid, but our access to affected areas remains restricted. Some regions are still cut off entirely, with no clear picture of the damage or the number of casualties. The lack of communication and coordination is slowing down rescue and relief efforts, leaving many to fend for themselves. As night falls, power outages have left entire cities in darkness. The only sources of light come from fires burning in the rubble and the flashlights of rescue teams still searching for survivors. The coming hours will be critical. Rescuers know that the chances of survival decrease with every passing moment. With limited resources and an enormous task ahead, the people of Myanmar and Thailand are facing one of the most challenging nights in their history. The Fort MacMurray wildfires of 2016 were among the most destructive and costly natural disasters in Canadian history. What started as a small fire in a remote area southwest of the city quickly grew into a massive inferno, forcing nearly 88,000 people to flee their homes. The fire, which would come to be known as the Beast, left behind a path of devastation, consuming entire neighborhoods and reducing thousands of homes to ash. It all began on May 1st when a helicopter forestry crew spotted a wildfire burning about 15 kilometers from Fort MacMurray. At first, it seemed manageable. Fire crews arrived within 45 minutes, hoping to contain it before it could spread, but the conditions that day were far from ideal. A dry winter, unusually warm temperatures, and low humidity had left the forested areas around Fort MacMurray like a tinderbox, just waiting to ignite. By May 3rd, the situation took a dramatic turn for the worse. Temperatures soared to nearly 33 degrees Celsius, accompanied by strong winds gusting up to 72 kilometers per hour. Within hours, the fire exploded in size, sweeping through the city's outer neighborhoods. Firefighters worked desperately to hold back the flames, but the fire was moving too fast. Entire streets were swallowed by fire in a matter of minutes. Residents who thought they had more time suddenly found themselves trapped in a nightmare. Smoke filled the air, turning the afternoon sky an eerie shade of orange. Many people had only moments to grab their loved ones and flee. For some, the escape was chaotic. Bumper-to-bumper traffic stretched for kilometers as people tried to leave the city, flames creeping dangerously close to the roads. Others had no choice but to abandon their vehicles and escape on foot. One of the most terrifying aspects of the wildfire was its unpredictability. The fire was so intense that it created its own weather, generating massive clouds of smoke and even fire-induced lightning storms. These storms made conditions even more dangerous, sparking new fires in different areas and adding to the chaos. For emergency responders, the battle was unlike anything they had ever faced. Despite their best efforts, the flames were relentless, pushing deeper into Fort MacMurray. The evacuation of the city became the largest in Alberta's history. Entire hospitals had to be cleared out, with medical staff scrambling to transport patients to safer locations. The airport, which had initially remained open for emergency flights, was eventually forced to shut down as the fire came too close. Many evacuees had no idea where they would go or how long they would be gone. They simply had to leave, hoping they would have something to return to once the fire was finally under control. As night fell on May 3rd, Fort MacMurray was engulfed in flames. The fire showed no signs of stopping, and officials could only watch as homes, businesses, and entire communities burned. The coming days would bring even more devastation as the fire continued to spread across northern Alberta, leaving behind a level of destruction that few could have ever imagined. As the wildfire continued its relentless spread through Fort MacMurray, emergency crews faced overwhelming challenges. Firefighters from across Alberta and other provinces rushed in to help, but the sheer size and intensity of the blaze made containment nearly impossible. With gusting winds pushing flames in unpredictable directions, it became a battle of endurance, strategy, and luck. By May 4th, officials confirmed that thousands of structures had already been destroyed. The flames didn't discriminate. Homes, schools, businesses, and entire streets were reduced to rubble. The fire leapt across roads and rivers, consuming everything in its path. In some areas, firefighters were forced to abandon their efforts, retreating to safer zones as the heat became too intense to withstand. The smoke was so thick that it turned day into night, making it nearly impossible to see more than a few meters ahead. With the entire city under evacuation orders, thousands of people were scattered across Alberta, searching for shelter. Many ended up in temporary evacuation centers, while others relied on family, friends, or even strangers for a place to stay. Cities like Edmonton, Calgary, and Lac La Biche took in thousands of evacuees, offering food, medical aid, and a safe place to sleep. The Canadian Red Cross quickly stepped in, organizing donations and relief efforts. As more people fled, Alberta declared a state of emergency, mobilizing every available resource to assist both the displaced residents and the firefighters battling the inferno. One of the biggest concerns was keeping the fire from reaching critical infrastructure, including Fort MacMurray's hospital and the region's oil production sites. The Athabasca oil sands, located north of the city, were responsible for a significant portion of Canada's oil output, and the threat of fire disrupting operations was a major concern. Oil companies were forced to shut down facilities, and workers were evacuated to prevent further catastrophe. Despite the destruction, there were moments of hope. Firefighters managed to save key areas, including downtown Fort MacMurray, where many government buildings and businesses remained intact. Emergency crews worked tirelessly, often going without sleep, to protect what little remained. Their efforts were nothing short of heroic, with many firefighters pushing themselves to exhaustion in an attempt to stop the fire's advance. But even with all the manpower and resources being poured into the fight, the wildfire showed no sign of slowing down. It continued to grow, spreading further north and east into the dense forests of Alberta. Officials worried that if the wind shifted again, more communities could be at risk. The battle was far from over, and for the people of Fort MacMurray, the uncertainty of what they would return to was almost too much to bear. As the wildfire spread deeper into the forests of northern Alberta, it continued to burn out of control, leaving destruction in its wake. The scale of the fire made it one of the most challenging disasters Canadian emergency responders had ever faced. Firefighters from across the country worked around the clock, using every available resource to slow the inferno. Despite their efforts, the fire showed no sign of stopping. One of the greatest challenges was the unpredictable nature of the flames. Changing wind patterns caused sudden flare-ups, forcing firefighters to constantly adjust their strategies. The extreme heat created its own weather conditions, with fire-generated clouds producing dry lightning, which only worsened the situation. The dense smoke made air support difficult, limiting the ability of water bombers and helicopters to reach certain areas. Even when aircraft were able to drop water or fire retardant, the flames would quickly reignite in the dry conditions. With thousands of evacuees displaced across Alberta, the need for shelter and basic necessities became urgent. Evacuation centers in cities like Edmonton and Calgary quickly reached capacity. Volunteers and organizations worked tirelessly to provide food, clothing, and medical assistance to those who had lost everything. The Canadian Red Cross led a nationwide effort to collect donations, with millions of dollars pouring in from across the country. In the meantime, officials were trying to assess the full extent of the damage. Entire neighborhoods had been reduced to rubble, and many residents had no idea if their homes were still standing. The town's power grid had suffered significant damage, leaving large portions of Fort MacMurray without electricity. Additionally, the municipal water system had been compromised, forcing officials to issue a boil water advisory for the entire city. Efforts to contain the fire became a delicate balance between protecting what remained of Fort MacMurray and preventing further spread into nearby oil sands facilities. While several production sites had already been evacuated, a complete shutdown of operations would have widespread economic impacts. Fire crews worked day and night to create fire breaks and stop the flames from reaching critical infrastructure. Despite all the destruction, there were moments of resilience and generosity. Communities across Alberta and beyond opened their doors to evacuees, offering housing, food, and support. Businesses donated supplies, and people from all walks of life stepped up to help. The sense of unity in the face of disaster was a testament to the strength of those affected. As the days stretched into weeks, the fire continued to burn across vast areas of forest, leaving uncertainty about when residents would be able to return. The people of Fort MacMurray could only wait and hope that, when the flames finally died down, there would still be something left to rebuild. As the wildfire raged on, the fight to contain it remained an uphill battle. Fire crews faced relentless challenges, with extreme heat, unpredictable winds, and thick smoke making their work nearly impossible at times. The flames had already scorched hundreds of thousands of hectares, and while firefighters were making progress in some areas, the fire continued to spread across northern Alberta and even into parts of Saskatchewan. With the fire moving across such a massive area, officials were forced to make difficult decisions about where to allocate resources. Some parts of the forest were simply too dangerous to protect, and efforts had to be focused on saving what remained of Fort MacMurray and critical infrastructure. The fire had already destroyed thousands of homes, and officials feared that if it spread further, even more communities would be at risk. Meanwhile, the long-term impact of the fire was becoming clear. Many oil sands operations in the region had been shut down or reduced, leading to economic losses that would take years to recover from. Transportation routes were also affected, with major highways closed due to dangerous conditions. The thick smoke from the fire spread far beyond Alberta, reaching other provinces and even parts of the United States, causing air quality warnings in several areas. For the thousands of evacuees, the uncertainty was one of the hardest parts. Weeks had passed since they had fled their homes, and many still had no idea when they would be allowed to return. While some were fortunate enough to stay with family or friends, others were living in temporary shelters, unsure of what they would find when they eventually went back. The psychological toll of the disaster was immense, with many struggling to cope with the loss and the fear of rebuilding from nothing. Despite everything, efforts to help those affected never wavered. The Canadian Red Cross continued to distribute aid, providing financial assistance to families who had lost their homes. Local organizations, businesses, and individuals stepped up in incredible ways, donating supplies, raising money, and offering whatever support they could. The outpouring of generosity from across Canada and beyond showed that even in the face of disaster, the spirit of community remained strong. Firefighters refused to give up, even as the battle stretched into weeks. With every passing day, containment efforts improved, and officials began to gain some control over the blaze. Slowly but surely, the situation was beginning to turn, and discussions about the next steps, recovery, rebuilding, and healing, were were starting to take shape. But before that could happen, one major question remained. When would it be safe for the people of Fort McMurray to return home? As the fire was finally declared under control on July 5th, 2016, the residents of Fort McMurray began to look toward the future. The evacuation, which had lasted for over a month, had left its mark on the community. While the fire had destroyed thousands of homes and businesses, the people's resilience in the face of this unprecedented disaster was equally as powerful. The destruction was staggering, but the determination to rebuild was stronger than ever. For the firefighters and emergency personnel who had worked tirelessly, the sense of relief was palpable. However, their work was far from over. The fire had not only ravaged Fort McMurray, but it had also spread to other areas of northern Alberta and Saskatchewan. Leaving behind a trail of scorched earth, the efforts to fully extinguish the flames continued for more than a year, with the fire only being completely extinguished on August 2nd, 2017. In many ways, the aftermath of the fire was just as challenging as the fire itself, as the community struggled to pick up the pieces. The scale of the disaster was immense, with the cost of damages reaching an estimated $9.9 billion, making it the costliest disaster in Canadian history. While rebuilding efforts were underway, it was clear that the road to recovery would take years. Thousands of homes needed to be rebuilt, and the infrastructure that had been damaged or destroyed required extensive repairs. But throughout it all, the people of Fort McMurray remained determined to rebuild their lives and their community, drawing strength from each other and the support they had received from across the country. Despite the devastation, the wildfires also brought about important lessons in disaster preparedness and response. Authorities and emergency services took a hard look at their response efforts, and many changes were made to improve preparedness for future wildfires. As Canada continues to grapple with the effects of climate change, the Fort McMurray wildfires served as a reminder of how powerful nature can be, and how vital it is to be ready for such events. As the years have passed since that fateful day in May, the memory of the fire still looms large in the minds of those who lived through it. But slowly, life in Fort McMurray has begun to return to normal. New homes have been built, businesses have reopened, and the community has found a way to move forward. The scars left by the fire are still there, but the spirit of Fort McMurray is stronger than ever. It's a city that has faced unimaginable loss and destruction, but has come out the other side more united and determined than ever before. In the end, the Fort McMurray wildfires were a tragic chapter in Canada's history, but they were also a testament to the strength and resilience of the people who lived through it. The road to recovery will continue for many years, but with the support of the community and the nation, the people of Fort McMurray are determined to rise from the ashes and rebuild their lives.